Sigmund Freud and Viktor Frankl never debated directly. Freud died in 1939, and most of Frankl's major published work came after the war. But they were separated by only a generation, both worked in Vienna, and both spent their professional lives trying to answer the same fundamental question: what drives human beings? The difference in their answers is one of the most consequential disagreements in the history of psychology. Freud's answer was the pleasure principle. In his model, human behavior is fundamentally driven by the ID, the reservoir of instinctual drives, primarily libidinal, that seek discharge and satisfaction. The ego manages the encounter between these drives and the external world. The superego, internalized social and parental prohibitions, constrains and redirects them. Psychological health, in this framework, is a kind of successful negotiation between the raw energy of the ID and the demands of reality. Neurosis arises when this negotiation fails, when drives are repressed, distorted, or redirected in ways that produce suffering. Freud's framework was revolutionary and remains enormously influential. He was among the first to take the inner life seriously as a domain of scientific inquiry. He recognized that much of human motivation operates below the level of conscious awareness. He understood that early experience shapes adult psychology in ways that are not always visible to the person being shaped. These insights retain their value. But Frankl believed Freud had made a foundational error, identifying a real and significant secondary motivation, pleasure, and elevating it to the position of the primary one. In Frankl's view, the pleasure principle describes what happens in the absence of meaning, not what drives human beings at their deepest level. When genuine purpose is absent, people do indeed reach for pleasure, for sensation, stimulation, the reduction of tension. But pleasure in this case is a substitute, not a primary drive. The proof, Frankl would argue, is that pleasure never fully satisfies the underlying need, no matter how intensely or consistently it is pursued. Frankl also challenged Freud's model of the self. For Freud, the self is essentially a product of its drives and its history, shaped by biology and early experience in ways that limit its freedom. Consciousness is largely an epiphenomenon, the foam on top of the unconscious currents that actually determine behavior. The person's sense of choosing freely is, in Freud's framework, often an illusion, a post hoc rationalization of drives and conflicts operating below awareness. Frankl's model preserved a space that Freud's tended to close off: genuine freedom. Not unlimited freedom. Frankl was not naive about the power of biology, history, and circumstance. But he insisted on what he called the noutic dimension, the specifically human capacity to step back from one's own drives and history, observe them with some degree of detachment, and choose a response. This capacity may be limited in various ways, but it is real, and it is the seat of moral responsibility, conscience, and the will to meaning. The practical divergence is significant. A therapy built on Freudian principles will tend to look backward, into childhood, into repressed memories, into unconscious conflicts, for the causes of present suffering. The healing process involves excavating and interpreting the past, bringing unconscious material into consciousness, and resolving the conflicts that have been driving behavior from below. This is valuable work for the kinds of suffering that Freud's model accurately describes. A therapy built on Franklian principles will tend to look forward, not dismissing the past, but refusing to see it as the whole story. The key question is not what has shaped me but what I am being called to now. The healing process involves reconnecting with values, discovering or rediscovering sources of meaning, and exercising the freedom to respond to life's demands with something other than the patterns inherited from the past. Frankl himself had great personal respect for Freud and acknowledged his intellectual debt. He was not interested in tearing Freud down. He was interested in completing what Freud had started, adding the dimension that the pleasure principle could not account for. Where Freud saw a being driven by its appetites, Frankl saw a being capable of rising above them in the service of what matters most. Both images contain truth. The question is which one you organize your life around. Subscribe to the Psychology of Viktor Frankl to explore more of his timeless ideas.